And we're live.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. So welcome to Virtual Coffee. Startup Tucson is a nonprofit dedicated to transforming the region's economy through entrepreneurship and innovation. And we're doing that right now with SBA loan referral services, connection services, and sharing the resources that come in through our partners. And we're doing so much more. So I'm going to pull up my announcement slide right now to share all the details with you. So Tucson Shops Tucson is launching tomorrow at noon. This is for small businesses and entrepreneurs to be accessing new audiences and getting promotional support. We will be offering coaching as well for the online transition. And be sure to check out social media around noontime. You're going to see an internet takeover with everyone who's participating. If you would like to participate with this launch, then just email us and I'll get you the social media materials. And then afterwards, we will be celebrating at our first ever virtual startup nights. We will be celebrating with networking. We really just want to know how you're doing, what's working, maybe what's not working. So we'll get started at 5:30. We'll share some Startup Tucson announcements, and then we'll break you out into these virtual rooms where then you can take some of the questions that we're going to provide you and just give updates and connect with old friends or connect with new friends in the ecosystem. And theme alert, I wish I had colorful explosions, but there's going to be a theme. So please wear a fun or silly hat. And then also bonus points for dressing up with some variation of animal print, everything appropriate, of course. And then we also have our Startup Labs. That's also a first ever virtual event. And we have a few spots left for you. This is great for really clarifying your business concept, your product, and then kind of drilling down on who your customer is. So that is coming up on Monday. That's all that I have for announcements. So I'm Sophia Gonzalez. I'm the Community and Event Coordinator. And I'm passing it off to Kanisha, our Program Manager.
Good morning, guys. I am Kanisha Raymond. I am the Program Manager here at Startup Tucson, and I'm so excited to welcome Cindy Jordan. Cindy Jordan is the founder of Pyx Health. There aren't many entrepreneurs whose careers include police officer, presidential campaign fundraiser, and founder of 2 healthcare IT startups. One of them, she successfully multi-million-dollar exited. Throughout each career change, Cindy has followed the same altruistic mantra: change lives to make the world a better place. So we are so excited to welcome Cindy Jordan. Guys, please take a moment and introduce yourself in the comments below. And after Cindy's presentation, we will have a Q&A. Welcome, Cindy. Please feel free to introduce yourself and share your screen.
All right. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. I realized it would be better if we were all in person, but given the times, we'll make this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a presentation here. I'm going to put myself off camera during the presentation, and then I'll come back on Sophia at the end for Q&A, if that works for everyone. So let me see if I can figure this out. Can you still see my screen, Sophia?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. All right. So, seriously though, I like to make fun of myself about how many careers one person can actually have. And And we'll talk about that a little bit and how it's kind of brought me to the point of where I am today. But the first thing I thought was really interesting, that if you Google careers for women on that, and these are some of the top 40 responses, and you'll notice, there's clothing business, food industry, sewing business, soap making, which is one of my favorite, basket maker, but nowhere does it say police officer, political fundraiser, or tech company founder. And while my path has been unique, and along each stop in my journey, I've learned valuable lessons, which I'm going to share with you today. These lessons are good for everyone, but being a woman in significantly male-dominated fields is actually kind of part of the story. So let's talk about my first stop right out of college. I was a police officer. I wish I looked like that in my uniform. And I worked in a suburb of Washington, D.C. And for the majority of my 5 years there, I worked from 8 at night until 6 in the morning. So one of the most important lessons I learned, and I'm telling you that I worked permanent midnights, because from 8 at night till 6 in the morning, you have the least amount of police officers on the street. And so often, in fact, pretty much the entire time, I rode by myself. So I learned pretty quickly that I had to get ahead of trouble before trouble got ahead of me. And, and again, think about your own lives and the businesses that you're running. This applies everywhere, not just being a cop in a suburb of DC. You can tell when things are starting to go bad, right? And in the instance when I was on the street, you could tell by people's body language, like maybe their head would start kind of moving around and they'd take an aggressive stance and their tone would go up. And what at that point, I didn't want to be hurt and I didn't want them to get hurt. And so what I would do when I would start to see the signs of trouble is I would just use my pepper spray and I would spray, I would call it spray the situation. And I had the dubious distinction in my precinct of being the police officer that used the most pepper spray in any given year. And while that is a little funny, the lesson is deeper than that. It means that when you see trouble in your own business, there are ways to get ahead of it. And while sometimes it might be painful in the ways that you can get ahead of trouble, it's better than letting it take control of you. The second lesson I learned about being a cop is that perspective is everything. And so in business, my current life, a bad day might be that there's a bug in the code and it's affecting our end users and we've got to figure out what it is and get it fixed and get it released to the store, et cetera. But in my previous life as a cop, a bad day was getting stabbed in the ankle, for example. And so when you think about perspective in that way, which is, yes, it is bad when things go wrong in your normal everyday setting, but there could always be a worst case scenario. And that helps you sort of navigate through whatever's in front of you and tackle those obstacles. And the third thing I learned when I was a police officer is to be grateful. There are a lot of people out there that are struggling, and I saw it every single day that I went to work. And I felt like if I could find a silver lining in almost every situation, it kept me on the right side of things, because mindset is critical. And we're going to talk about that a lot during this presentation. But I really do believe that the power of the mind is almost, if not more so powerful than anything that you do when you're trying to run your own business or start your own business. All right, so after being a cop, I decided I would use my political degree and I got into political fundraising. And this in and of itself gave me a few life lessons as well. And the first one is that people buy passion. And so what do I mean like that? So when you're fundraising for a political candidate, you're literally selling the promise of a better life to whomever you're trying to raise funds from. And the only way that they believe that promise is that they have to believe your passion. And it's the same with your business. If your passion doesn't come through, first and foremost, before the financials, before the business plan, before kind of what I call like the building blocks of success, it starts with passion. And most particularly when you're talking about businesses in their infancy, investors are investing in the entrepreneur and the passion that they show. And the second thing I learned in politics, and I had already clicked on that, was to be authentic. So the campaign I happened to work on was Gore versus Bush. And I know that ages me a bit here, but a lot of writing has been done about that political campaign. If you guys are old enough to remember, that was the hanging Chad incident, and the decision for that presidential election went all the way to the Supreme Court, but that never ever should have been the case. Like, the post-mortem around Al Gore was that he lost his authenticity, that he started letting himself being handled, that he would show up at meetings and say what he thought he should say, maybe instead of what he wanted to say. He would dress in a way that he thought people wanted to see him instead of the way he wanted to be. And so he lost his authenticity, and in which case it made a very close election, which he ended up losing in the Supreme Court. What I would say to you, and there is a lot of times when you're, running your own business, starting your own business, figuring out how to get it off the ground, people are going to they're going to give you their opinions left and right. And it's important to listen to them, but never to lose your authenticity. Like, there's a reason that you are the one assuming the risk and starting the business. And that is important to keep in mind as you start to navigate through all of that trouble that we talked about in the first slide. And the last thing I learned about political fundraising is that politics is poopy. A poop emoji never gets old. But anyway, it's a business centered around self-preservation, and it really isn't all about the common good. And so I got a little disenfranchised around politics and decided after that I would move to Tucson. I had been here a few times for a few political fundraisers, and having grown up on the East Coast, I loved the desert. I loved the vibe of it. So I literally, without a job, loaded up my 2 Chihuahuas into a U-Haul truck, got the Thornbirds as a book on tape, and started driving across the country, and ended up here in Tucson. And one of the first places that I landed was at an ad agency called LP&G. And I'm sure some of you on the phone had exposure to this agency. Back in the day in Tucson, we were rather large. We represented big clients like the Tucson CVB, et cetera. And what I learned at LP&G in my 7 years there was how to be a good boss. And why? It's because I worked for these amazing women. And for the first time in all of my careers, I was exposed to the fact that I actually might be smart. And I know that seems crazy, but the environment at LP&G was about building people up, me included, and not putting them down, putting them in their place. In fact, when you do that kind of thing, you stifle quiet brilliance. And so every day I went to work there, and every day I worked with those women, I started to get what I call swag. And we talk about swagger a lot in my business because it matters. It's, if you believe in yourself, other people are going to believe in you. Your passion is going to come through. So I would say that where I learned how to supervise and be the leader of people was at LP&G. And here's some of the lessons. Number one, I treat employees like family. Now I realize that opens the door up to some other things. Like, I realize families fight. I know that there's dysfunction, but what I mean when I say treat your employees like family is to treat them with the kind of respect that you treat your mom or your dad or your brother or your sister, and the kind of gentleness that you treat your kids. And in return, they'll treat you that way in return. Second thing was to operate with full transparency. What I loved about working at LP&G is I felt like an owner. I felt like I knew what was going on in the business. And I'm sure that the owners didn't tell us everything, but it really was a sense of accountability, responsibility, but it was welcomed. So there were very few closed door meetings there. There were very few kind of like small cliques where some people were in the know and others weren't. And I try to do this with my company as well. We do staff meetings weekly. And I think if you could listen in, you'd hear that we talk about things that you might expect to stay in the C-suite. And the last thing I learned, and I touched on this a little bit, was to offer lots of opportunity for personal growth. So as you're maybe listening to this presentation, and it's hard to just be the one talking, I have to say, but as you're listening to this presentation and you're thinking about your own business or your startup or the venture that you're trying to get off the ground, and you're going to pull people into it because they're going to believe in your passion and your vision, you need to give people the opportunity to also grow with you and with the business. Because without that, people get stagnant. And with that comes discontent. And, one of the most important things about building a business is the people and making sure that they're with you and loyal and that they would walk through the fire with you. So that was amazing. And frankly, I probably would have stayed there forever and not started my own business. Oh, wait, I forgot one thing. I'm so sorry. And the last thing I learned there, which is probably the most important, was to have fun. We had a ton of fun. So at our current business, we do things like we do Friday fun days. We used to do them once a month when we were small, but now we're kind of do them like once a quarter. But we literally will close down the office and go to the movies or go bowling. One time we went axe throwing. And even if you can't afford to take your whole company out to the movies, you certainly can go to the park and have a picnic. It's important to encourage interaction and to laugh and to have fun, because if you're not doing that, then everything else, that having fun is about getting ahead of trouble before trouble gets ahead of you. All right. So what happened after I left LP&G? Well, if you all remember, in 2008, that's when our economy crashed. Of course, it looks like nothing like compared to what we're going through now. We'll talk about that a little later. But when 2008, when the crash hit, obviously ad agencies, marketing agencies took a big shot. And so what ended up happening was our agency ended up laying basically everybody off in the matter of a week. So while this was going on and there was all this turmoil, I took the two women that I worked for out for coffee. And I said, hey, listen, I've been representing a huge healthcare client now for about 6 years. And I see a real opportunity to start a business. And there's no better time to start a business than in an economic downturn. And so that's also some good advice for what we're going through right now with COVID-19. And so what I said to them is that the way that patients move around the healthcare system is antiquated, and it's heavily reliant on Post-it notes and the fax machine. And I felt like there was an opportunity to build a software platform that would help facilitate the movement of patients from primary care to secondary, which would be like a specialist, to tertiary, which would be like a hospital. And so the two women that I worked for, Colleen and Leslie, without even thinking about it, put their money in, and Medical Referral Source was born. And there was a lot to learn about Medical Referral Source, but the best part of it was that we exited in 3 years, almost to the day. I mean, literally 3 years and maybe a month, for $12.5 million to the advisory board. So I'm going to jump back to the advisory board here in a second. But first, let me tell you the things I learned when I was the entrepreneur in my first startup. And these are probably the two most poignant lessons that I'm still using today. And the first is that capital is king. So I'm sure there's some of you that are listening in on this that are trying to start your own business, and or you have a business and you're experiencing a capital crunch. Before Medical Referral Source, and certainly the women I worked with at LP&G, we didn't have millions of dollars sitting around so that we could fund a software business. I had to be connected to money. And it really was luck, which is another very important lesson, that I got introduced to these two gentlemen that ended up being a huge part of the company and also are involved in my current company, Pyx. And when I say by luck is that I talked about Medical Referral Source everywhere I went. I talked about it at family picnics. I talked about it at holidays. I talked about it to my friends. It was to the point where it was almost offensive. But again, I had passion. I believed. I was imparting that passion. And I happened to be at a barbecue talking to somebody who said, you know what? I'm going to connect you to a guy named Kirk Saunders, who ended up being on our board. And I want you to tell him what you're doing. And then the rest is history. Kirk ended up coming on the board of Medical Referral Source and connecting us to capital. And he and I went around and sold that passion around that business. But had I not talked to everyone and leveraged my family and my friends and literally made it like a part of the fabric of who I was, I would not have been connected to capital. So my lesson here is, if you're looking for money, if you're thinking about how you're going to get money to start a business, you talk to every and anyone, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And the second lesson I learned is the no assholes rule. So there is actually a book called No Assholes, and I suggest that all of you, if you haven't, go out and read it. But when you start to experience success, and I'm sure there are a lot of you on this call that are experiencing success, I say success is like blood in the water, right? It's like it brings out the greed in people, and in this image here, or the shark in people. And so my lesson in medical referral source was that it was my first time. And when somebody at, starting a business, building a software business, raising capital, like playing in the world of venture capitalists, thinking about a merger or an acquisition. And so when somebody with a lot more experience than me, who saw the success that we had built, came along and said, I can do it better, I know better, I think not only should you let me in, but you should let me in a way that was, probably, which now I would consider offensive. I believed them. I literally lost my self-confidence and thought that the only way I was going to be successful is if I let, somebody into my company, into my cap table, who turned out to be exactly as he presented, which was an asshole. So what I'll say to you around this is, you have to trust your gut and you have to believe in yourself. Does that mean that you shouldn't dilute along the way? No. Does that mean that you shouldn't incent your employees with a stake in the company? No, absolutely not. It just means you should be discerning about who you bring in and when you bring them in. And if you feel that little rumbling in your tummy, like someone doesn't listen, they don't ask you questions about yourself, they talk over you, they think that you know better. These are some of the lessons from the book. Put an A with a circle around it in your notes and walk away. So those were the lessons that I learned about medical referral source. So let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing now at Pyx Health. First of all, after working for the advisory board for 2 years, which was part of the merger agreement, I didn't think I would ever get back into healthcare startup IT. I mean, I was sort of spent. In fact, for about 6 months after leaving the advisory board, I went to the movies like 3 or 4 times a week, and I was living my best life. I was in bliss. But during that year, I witnessed my stepdaughter, who's diagnosed with bipolar, go through an exceptional decline, meaning she went from very, very stable to ending up in an inpatient facility. And it took about 12 months. And the path along the way and what happened, I mean, we could talk about that for hours. But when I looked back at it in some kind of like an analytical way, the very first sign that things were going bad, remember, get ahead of trouble before it gets ahead of you, was that she started to self-isolate. And when you're her family and you're used to sending text messages and being very transactional, you don't notice social isolation for what it is. But that's exactly what happened. So I started doing a ton of research around social determinants of health, like meaning, what are the things outside of the classic clinical setting that affect people's health? And loneliness and social isolation were essentially nowhere to be found. We think about food, we think about transportation, we think about housing, but we don't think about somebody's mental health around loneliness and social isolation. So I'm going to show you what Pyx Health does. So bear with me here. This is Janet. Janet is one of the members that we serve, and we call them members because we sell into health insurance plans, and health insurance plans don't have patients, they have members. And we specifically sell to Medicaid and Medicare Advantage. And we sell into the vulnerable populations within Medicaid and Medicare Advantage. So think about people living at or below the poverty line. Think about people with behavioral or mental health disorders and physical health problems. Think about people who have been in and out of the healthcare system with some kind of chronic condition for a long time. These are the people that Pyx Health serves. So meet Janet. She is a substitute teacher and she's had problems along the way, but she ends up getting pneumonia. And so she ends up, as you can see here, this line that you're seeing in the screen is what we call the traditional healthcare setting. She goes into the hospital, she gets a care manager, she follows up with her doctors. Yet despite all the best in class care that she's getting from the healthcare system, she still ends up back in the hospital. Why did that happen? So I don't know how many of you on the phone are Stranger Things fans, but I'm a huge fan. And this is what we call the upside down, right? So it kind of looks like the upside down if you watch the show. But while Janet is going through the experiences of the traditional healthcare setting, she also, because she was a substitute teacher, lost her job. And because she couldn't go to work because she was sick for so long. And when she lost her job, she was embarrassed and ashamed, and she didn't want to burden her friends. So she started to self-isolate. And then from that, she started to become depressed and then clinically lonely. And then the money ran out and she didn't have money for food, which is another social determinants of health indicator. So she stopped taking her medicine and bam, she's back in the hospital. And I know you all can see this and you're probably thinking to yourself, there is no way that our current healthcare system is even remotely set up to address the upside down. So while it might seem counterintuitive to use technology to make people feel less lonely, it's actually the only answer. And what I mean by that is there are not enough human beings on this planet to address what was a pandemic long before COVID-19, social isolation and loneliness. So Pyx Health is literally the first to market technology that offers a scalable loneliness and social isolation solution for healthcare organizations. And I'm going to play this short video that introduces Pyx Health, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about it. So let's see if this works. If you don't hear the sound, please let me know. Okay, so that's Pyx. We are the first company that combines artificial intelligence, which is Pixar, who you met in that video. That's our empathetic, really funny, super compassionate chatbot with human beings. And now when you think about software, a lot of entrepreneurs will try to have the highest profit margin possible with the most scalable solution that takes the least amount of touch. But that's not what we do at Pyx, because we're talking about loneliness and isolation. And unfortunately, robots can only do so much. So what we do is we combine the reach of artificial intelligence, and we use Pixar to develop a trusting relationship with the end user. But when that person is in trouble, when they are scoring poorly around loneliness, because underneath everything Pixar does is a lot of smarts. It's a lot of evidence-based science that calculates really whether a person is heading, is in trouble, is heading for a clinical acuity. And so if someone scores poorly around loneliness, we have a whole call center of people that will actually reach out and intervene. If they have an urgent need around any other social determinants of health need, like food, we will reach out and we will connect them with resources. So I like to call it the perfect combination of artificial intelligence and human intervention. So how do we do it? And I'll just go through this very briefly. But firstly, when we sign a contract with a health insurance payer, they send us on a daily basis a list of all of their vulnerable members that are in what we call a transition of care. And this is our intentional delivery. Because it's one thing to throw technology out into the world and say, hey, all you lonely people, come use the technology. But that's just not how things work. You've got to catch people when they have a propensity for loneliness to affect their health. And so we call through the transition list. Our call center does, the Andys that you saw there. We call everybody that works in our call center an Andy. It's our compassionate call center. And then we get people on the app, and we're very successful at this. Our onboarding numbers used to be 67%, but now post-COVID-19, they're 84%. And I personally believe, because a human being is a part of the interaction with the technology at the beginning, our utilization numbers are very, very high. The second thing we do is build trust. So I told you about Pixar. I told you that he's funny and he tells a lot of jokes. One of the things Pixar never does is ask clinical questions. He never treats the end user like a diagnosis. He always engages around sentiment. So think about if you were going to go meet a friend at a coffee shop and you were suffering from bipolar or depression. You don't sit down at Starbucks and your friends say, hey, Cindy, how's your depression going? No, your friend says, hey, Cindy, how are you? And you answer how you are. And that's what the robot does. He offers self-management around sentiment in the moment. And it's this complicated, cool algorithm that builds essentially emotional intelligence around the end user. And once we have that trust, we can use it to do the things I've already told you about, where we'll use our call center to intervene and actually impact someone's health. Again, not to get too far down the road, and we can talk about this in Q&A, but we do have a case study that one of our partners conducted that proves that when you address loneliness and social isolation, you can not only improve the cost that a person has on the healthcare system, so spend, but you can improve their clinical outcomes. And we literally just got this case study a few weeks ago, and we were, floored. I actually dropped a tear and got a lump in my throat, because to know that it's working is amazing. All right. So where are we headed in today's world with everyone now experiencing social isolation? And that has been the big change for us at Pyx. We have gotten more busy than I can possibly articulate. But the difference is when we're on the phone and we're talking about what Pyx does and the results that we've seen, every person on that call with us, and all the way up to the CEO of a major health plan, now understands what it feels like to be socially isolated. What we know about healthcare today, when you think brick and mortar, going to the doctor, having to access your care by being physically in the presence of your physician, that's going to go away. Healthcare is going to be a lot more virtual than we've ever seen before. And Pyx is going to be the future of that whole person care. And that's all I have. So let me see if I can turn my camera back on and I can turn it back over to you guys.
Awesome. All right. So the questions are coming in.
Okay.
So I was curious, with your diverse background, you kind of pulled out key lessons from each, being an officer and being a campaign manager, and then starting to really awesome healthcare IT startups. what are the themes that you have pulled, that you've seen throughout all of those different careers?
I mean, I think the most important lesson through all those careers, from being a police officer to all the way to Pyx Health, where we're addressing loneliness and social isolation, is this idea of like emotional intelligence, right? Versus sort of being book smart. I'm not all that book smart, and I surround myself with people who are, but I consider myself emotionally intelligent. And so in every single step along the way, from being a cop to working at the agency to medical referral source to Pyx, it is about solving human problems, like, not creating efficiency, not moving information, not big data collection, but solving human problems. And for me, that's been the common thread of my career.
Mm-hmm. And some people are really great at emotional intelligence and others are not. Maybe you can share from lessons with working with the app, what are helpful things that people can take from what you've learned with emotional intelligence?
I mean, it's sort of like, one of the things that we do in the app is offer a lot of self-management. And because like, if you went to Google right now and you researched, top 10 things that you can do to solve loneliness, it's all around money and having privilege. It says like, buy a puppy, take yourself out to a nice dinner. But really, like, we as human beings have to find a way to sort of help ourselves. And that's really what Pyx does. And it's about being mindful. It's about having gratitude. It's about finding the good things in your life that you can attach to instead of the bad things. It's all stuff that we can sort of do on our own. And to me, that's like the human intelligence side of things.
One question before we start, we're going to jump into questions. Can you close your PowerPoint so we can see you more?
And then we have a question from Mauricio Velasquez.
Okay.
What are the difficulties as a woman in the tech startup world?
Well, there aren't any. That's a little bit of the difficulty. I mean, really, I think we did this analysis for our PR company did it. I think less than 5% of all healthcare tech companies are run by women. And so that's a real shame, because particularly when you're talking about the kind of healthcare company that I'm running, that's talking about the upside down, the human side of healthcare. Like, I think it's not that men can't be this way. Men are wonderful. I totally have wonderful men that are working in the company, but to bring a woman's compassion to that, I think is important. And I also believe, and this is why I thought women were good police officers, is that women handle conflict really differently, generally speaking. And so when you're talking about raising money and, you're in this world of venture capitalists and private equity firms, like, women come to the table in a really different way. And so there's few of us. And so our companies don't get funded as frequently as men do, even though women make up for more than 60% of the successful exits. So think about those numbers. Less than 5% are the CEOs and entrepreneurs, yet they tend to be overwhelmingly more than half of them are the successful exits.
Dre asks, can you circle back to your comment about starting a business in a crisis? What lessons did you learn in 2008 that can be applied now?
So, I realize that we're still in the acuity phase of this crisis. Like, we're still in it, but in a few weeks we won't be. Things will start to calm down. The news will calm down a little bit. And this is when opportunity is its greatest. So meaning the world is all of a sudden, and the business world in particular, is going to be more receptive to good ideas at this point in time. We're all going to have gone through something that has left us emotionally vulnerable. And that predisposes us to being receptive to ideas. We're out of our rat race, our everyday. The other thing is, money is going to be, again, we got to get through the acuity phase. And I do think it will be over here within the next month. Not over, but loosened up, is that there's going to be money on the table, because there's A lot of people who were in the market went to cash. Interest rates are down near zero. So people aren't making a lot of money off of, interest off of their money. They're going to be looking for good people with smart ideas who are able to float to the top during this crisis. And so that's what I mean, that a crisis is not actually a terrible time to think about starting a company.
You talk a lot about self-confidence and believing in yourself and how people can believe in you as much as you believe in yourself. I think as people are starting businesses, they have a hard time believing in themselves. What of your expertise, what information would you give them? What help would you say they need, or how can they get to the point where they're believing in themselves, as well as being confident in what they're doing and how they're walking? Because starting out fresh and new, you're trying things, but it's not always working. So you do lack that confidence or lose that confidence at some point.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I wish I could tell you that I wake up every single day and I'm totally confident and I feel amazing. And that's just not true, but one of the things that has changed my world around self-confidence and mental strength was doing some kind of meditation every day. And I don't necessarily mean meditation where you get quiet and you do a mantra over and over. I'm not good at that. I can't close my eyes for 10 minutes and not let thoughts in. But what I do is I never pick up my phone first thing in the morning. I always do some kind of reflective reading, even though it's only 3 or 4 sentences. And I try to write in my journal everything I'm grateful for. And what that does is it sets me up for the day to walk a little bit more confidently. I do that before I eat, before I have coffee, and the worst thing you can do for your self-confidence and for your swag and for your inner balance is to wake up in the morning and go straight to work. Look, I'm a workaholic like anybody, but I really believe in the way to self-confidence, the way to being successful is being right in your mind.
I love that. Ashley asks, accessibility in the app for members who may have impairments.
And then we'll tag on to that a language accessibility question from Aldina about, is there Spanish, Vietnamese, etc.
Yeah. So because we serve Medicaid and Medicare Advantage members, we have to comply with all CMS regulations, which includes accessibility and includes being written in Spanish. We are open to being in another language when we find, like before all of this hit, we were talking with a health plan in New York who was talking about writing in Russian because they serve a huge Russian population. So our technology is set up to do that. But here's what I'll tell you. What we do different than most healthcare IT startup companies, because of who we're serving vulnerable populations. We literally write the platform for the Samsung 5, not for the iPhone 11. Because a lot of the members we serve do have a smartphone, but it's not the latest edition. They don't have Wi-Fi. Less than half of them have Wi-Fi. And so if you build a graphic intensive platform that feeds a ton of videos, they're going to stop using it. If you send them 20 texts every single day and you're eating into their data, they're going to stop using it. So we pride ourselves, and that's what you guys saw, some of the graphics in the video. It's super simple and very flat and all done by design. And we use Giphies a lot because they don't take up a lot of data. So much to the chagrin of my IT developers who come up with these wonderful ideas, like we're very careful about what we do because we want accessibility in the app to be first and foremost.
And then we have John Decker from Anchor Wave. They're asking about the training for the call center for Andes. What are those philosophies and principles that you bake into that?
Well, the training is obviously relatively rigorous because we have to comply with HIPAA. We have to train people around personal health information. There's a lot of stuff that goes into serving members of health plans around vulnerable things like social determinants of health. But the who we pick was a lesson that we learned kind of the hard way. I mean, we live in Tucson, which is one of the call center capital meccas of the world, literally. So there's lots of people out there with call center experience. But what we learned is that that's not who we hire. We don't hire people who are used to being on the phone and getting off as quickly as they can and running to KPIs. We hire people who have a personal attachment to our mission. They have, like, essentially what I talked about early in the presentation, they have passion for it. So some of our most successful Andes, our call center people, have had zero call center experience, but they know that every time they pick up the phone and they get someone on the app, they're doing something that literally can change the course of their well-being. And so that's what we look to hire. And I wish you could meet the call center people on this call today. They're the salt of the earth, most amazing people. They come to work every day with this incredible passion. They're the lifeblood of what we do.
You definitely have your team showing up on Facebook Live right now. So maybe there's...
Oh, they're my biggest fans.
Yeah, you can go back and read through. So then with Pyx Health, Kanisha, did you have a question?
Yes, you talk a lot about what you do in loneliness and self-isolation and how your app does that in a time that we are very self-isolated. What can we do to change what we're doing to keep ourselves going and to not kind of get down on ourselves in the situation we're in right now?
It used to be, and before COVID-19 hit, you could read a whole bunch of articles because loneliness is becoming like a topic. The Wall Street Journal has written about it, I think, like 6 or 7 times over the last year, the New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. And it used to say, the only way to feel less lonely is to have human connection. Go visit someone, go to dinner. And when you talk about the populations we serve, a lot of them are homebound. That's not an option. And now, post-COVID-19, we're all homebound, or we should be, unless we have to go to work, right? And so you have to find ways to connect that's meaningful using technology, which isn't necessarily Facebook with a whole bunch of likes, and nothing against Facebook, because I know that we're streaming on Facebook, or Instagram, where you're looking for people to approve of your lifestyle. It's about making meaningful connections like we're doing right now. So certainly I would prefer to be in person with the two of you and with the entire group that's on this webinar, but I can't be. So what I did is, you guys are in my home, I'm in your home. I was looking at the pictures that you have on your wall. This is ways that we can be connected to one another. And that's what Pyx is building. It literally, through the chatbot, is giving people a connection to human beings. And if they don't have their own human being, we're gonna give them one in our Andes.
Well, I think, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question. So then as a 2-time founder, how far ahead are you looking?
Oh man, everyone talks about this. It's like, remember I told you about like smelling blood in the water? Like Pyx has been wildly successful even before COVID-19, much more than the first company. We did more revenue in Pyx in 8 months than I did in 3 years in the first company. So of course, everyone wants to talk about going big, taking, a huge Series B and building $100 million company, or God, why don't we even talk about going public? But here's what I care about. I care about the fact that we take it in chunks, that in this quarter, we're successful. And I say this to my team all the time. We are pushing a boulder up the hill with our noses. And if we can move it 1 inch at a time, before you know it, we'll kind of be over the apex and the future will be clear. What I know right now is that the future is we're signing contracts very quickly, almost to the point where we can't service them. And so we're hiring, we're building jobs in the economy, and we're serving people that are lonely. But my goal is a successful exit for not just myself and my family who have all made sacrifices for me to be able to do this twice, but for every single person that comes to Pyx, that has ever touched Pyx, that has ever put $1 into Pyx. So what degree will that success be? I'm not sure yet, but I'm sure it's going to be evident soon.
That's great. Yes, thank you so much.
Do you have any last words to leave us with?
Well, I'm sorry that this wasn't as interactive as it could be. I really, I guess the last words I'll leave are for the two of you. Like, I'm really proud of what you're doing. when I started Medical Referral Source back in 2008, there wasn't a lot of this in Tucson. There was in Phoenix. It was just getting going, but I hope that the people in your group really appreciate how valuable it is to have a community of people who are looking to start businesses, are founders, are looking to raise capital. So that's why I love to give my time. I wish I could give more, but thank you to the both of you for what you're doing. It's so valuable. And I know that, you know, after we sell Pyx, I promise to come over and help quite a bit.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
will welcome you for sure.
And once
Thank
this is
you.
over, yes, you have to come over and see the new office. As a
I
team,
would love that.
so excited to have you on here and so excited to see you in person. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So as soon as this is over, please come down, sit down, have coffee with us, so we can get to know more about where you're going and what you're doing.
That'd be great. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for the tidbits. I look forward to going back to them.
Yes. Thank you guys so much for
Take
joining
care.
us today at coffee. The announcements will be posted in this Facebook Live, but remember, tomorrow is the launch of Tucson Shops Tucson, as well as our first ever virtual startup nights. There's a lot of firsts, and then followed by our first ever virtual startup lab. So we'll see you guys soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.